Welcome back to the Woven Energy Podcast on Real Practical Shamanism with me, Joseph Sikora, and as always, Damon Smith. We are here to talk about shamanism from the ground up. So in this episode, what we thought would be a fantastic idea, as we have been covering quite a few things in stage 4 now, is to do an introduction to animal spirit dance. So up to this point, we've definitely talked quite a bit about regular spirit dance. So I think the first thing we want to really talk about, after we've thanked our awesome patrons, Damon, is the difference between regular spirit dance and animal spirit dance, and really what the benefits are and the journey that's involved. So should we thank our patrons first?
Yeah, let's do that. So you raised some big questions there. At least I'm glad to thank the patrons. That could take the whole episode.
Damon, anyway. Explain the universe. Go.
We always thank all our patrons. You guys are awesome. You support us tremendously. Even though some of us, I think me and Joe, are both absolutely deluged with work at the moment, you still cause us to do these things because it's lovely to have your support, and
it's nice having patrons to keep prodding us, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Just prod. Where's the next episode? And give us nice ideas for episodes as well.
Yeah, recent patrons. Obviously, we thank all of you. You're awesome. Recent patrons that I want to thank. You know why? There's Tim. Thanks, Tim. Greatly appreciated. Mr. Brett Galloway, who we've known for a long time and has become a power patron. That's great, Brett. Really appreciate it, mate. We got Ben. Thank you, sir. That's great. And Kung Fu fan. I don't know who you are, Kung Fu fan, but you're obviously a fan of Kung Fu. And your patronage is greatly appreciated. So yeah, also, that's wonderful, mate. And obviously the amazing Mr. Graham Barlow, who is not just a content creator, but also a patron on the podcast. Thank you very much, Graham. Oh, yes, and Emily, our long-standing patron, who has renewed her support for us. I don't know exactly how far back to go, but those are the relatively recent ones, so that's great. And to all our patrons, thank you so much.
And very briefly, you can sign up as a patron at patreon.com/wovenenergy. And what's the situation with the last gathering of the tribe, Damon? Are the videos there? Are they available to any new patrons?
Okay, I've been rather busy. There are some of them in there, 2 or 3 out of the, I think, 6 that we recorded, but they're coming. You can rely on the fact that they will get there.
And those were full presentations, full video. There's very in-depth into all sorts of techniques that we discuss on the podcast. So you'll be able to see that in video form. Goes very deep. So
they're quite long.
It's good stuff.
Quite long. They're like podcast length videos. Yeah. So yeah. And there's a lot of content in there deliberately. So I wanted to put a lot of content in so that people would have something to practice ahead of the Gathering of the Tribe next year. Although the Gathering of the Tribe next year will be focused on drum technique, we will be doing some spirit dance, obviously, as well, alongside that.
Okay, well, fantastic. Thank you so much, guys. Your patronage is welcome. So, speaking of spirit dance, where do you want to start then, Damon? Because I asked the question, what is the main difference, or what is the difference between regular spirit dance and animal spirit dance? If you want to start there, great. If you have an idea, then go for it.
So I think what I wanted to do was just broach the idea. We've kept saying for a long time we're going to put off animal spirit dance until later. And now that we're getting into the level 4 stuff, we've done a few changes. I mean, to be fair, we've done nowhere near enough changes probably to broach the subject of animal spirit dance in a what you might call a sensible kind of way. But I think what we have done is, given the idea of what those level 4 changes are all about, we've managed to convey that. And I think that we've probably conveyed enough of that just to give the idea of what animal spirit dance is about, in terms of, as you progress with your spirit dance practice, you start to embody in a fairly synergistic kind of way. Synergistic is probably not the best. Holistic way. All of those energy changes that are key to making spirit dance a useful shamanic tool. What we're ultimately trying to do is embody the changes that go on within the universe in a human kind of form. The general idea is that in embodying the changes, the commonly occurring energy patterns that go on within the universe in our spirit dance, we tend to create a ever richer radar for nature, so that at level 5, that radar can start to intersect with the natural energy patterns that occur within the environment, within the grove, within the environment in which the shaman is practicing their technique, spirit dance technique. Now, what we tend to do when we're learning spirit dance is we tend to treat these things in isolation, as we've been doing. We take them one at a time, starting with some basic changes. And, we've been using the Armabella words for those things, things like squall and Gaia and jag and meld and all those kind of very, very basic changes, and sort of focusing on them. If you can call an activity that recommends switching your brain off as a foundational practice, focusing, but practicing those things. And then we start to look at context. That's one change happening in the context of another change, and that's all the levels 4 stuff that we've started out on anyway. We've done some of them. And so it comes to the point where you've done enough of that kind of practice that you either start to realize, or you already know it, but you start to, when I say start to realize, I mean you start to realize in your mind, your body, and your spirit all acting together as one thing, that none of these things stand in isolation to each other. They all have that futatsu totsu in Japanese, that ahari in Chinese, the kind of 2-in-1 sort of interactivity where two changes interplay with each other, and this occurs again and again in nature. And this is one of the things that sort of led to ideas about yin and yang and that type of stuff in Chinese cosmology, was this fact that changes seem to occur. So, I mean, a good example of that is squall and Gaia. There's 2 ways that energy can return. One is it can go away and come back again, and the other one is it can go around in some sort of a cycle, squall and Gaia. Those are 2 returning patterns of energy. And what you start to find out is these paired changes occur throughout spirit dance in myriad different ways, on multiple changes, not just pairs, but multiple changes, because in those pairs, there can be other changes that are influential upon them. And what you find is spirit dance is actually an incredibly rich and varied activity. And the changes that you're embodying within your spirit dance as you progress become richer and richer and more complex, and other changes have influences on the changes. They don't stand in isolation from each other. And so shamans of the past, and I say the past, we're talking about, millions of years here, we're not talking about hundreds of years, they have tried to get a handle on this. And one example of that is the Book of Changes, obviously, which is a cerebral handle that was done, by people who are into writing stuff down, which isn't really a very shamanic thing to do. But in general, the much more common way that people have tried to do that is to look outside of ourselves, to say that part of the issue that we have, part of the reason, especially as civilized human beings, part of the reason that we have a difficulty getting our handle on this spirit dance or any kind of shamanic technique is that whole miasma thing. It's the whole thing that comes from us, that we've generated within our fairly artificial societies since we invented agriculture and wealth effectively, that isn't really a very natural kind of way of being for us. We did that, 5 to 10,000 years ago, which in genetic terms, in evolutionary terms, isn't very long at all compared to the couple of million years we've been doing that other thing, that much more shamanic thing. And so if we want to get back to that other thing, we need to look to people who are still doing it. And, that's why we did episodes early on the Evenks and Sand People and that type of thing. People are still doing this kind of thing, who are vanishingly rare in this world, to esoteric groups who've had this kind of experience within the civilized context. That's what the Heretics podcast is all about. That's what a lot of stuff about Rosicrucianism and other related things, Freemasonry and all that kind of stuff is all about over on Heretics. But there is another source of information or another source of learning. What does a shaman do? A shaman puts himself in a position where nature is their teacher. And generally, we think about that in relatively simplistic terms. I immerse myself in a fast-moving stream. Nature teaches me with some level of complexity within a limited context in which the variables are limited. Water flowing over my body at high speed with lots of eddies and whirls and all these kind of commonly recurring energy patterns you get in nature. But there is a place we can also look for a complex version of that, for a place where lots and lots of different energy changes all come together at the same time. And that place is animals, animal spirits. And I think, as we talked about earlier on the podcast, animal spirits are not something mystical. They're not something mythological, although they can become so. But what animal spirits are really about is how you put yourself in a position where nature is teaching you with a portfolio. I don't like the term portfolio. I don't know why it came to mind. With a bag of stuff, a bag of changes, all occurring at the same time, with some sense, with some commonality, with some flavor. Flavor's a really good word that underlies the ways in which all those myriad changes are all interacting. And this is what animal spirits are about. Animals embody that within nature.
So animals have an animating spirit which embeds them in their particular ecological niche. They have that niche, and then as humans, and when we want to try to see that through the lens of that animal, that teaches us what the animal experiences in their own ecological niche. That's a clumsy way of saying it, but I think what I'm
sort of. I mean, the best way to think about it is when we're learning these level 4 changes and we're incorporating them in our spirit dance, we tend to be doing it in isolation or 2 changes working together. We've been doing them in pairs so far, haven't we? Yeah. So here's a way. Once you start to get a handle on that, and it doesn't have to be every one of the changes that you couldn't possibly be. There's so many of them, and it doesn't even have to be all the ones in the book of changes. 60 something would be very, very nice to have, a good handle on 60 something changes. When you're 60 or 70 or 100 or whatever, I don't want to make out that it's exactly 64. That it would be a nice level to have a handle on before you ever start animal spirit dance, but you'd probably die of old age before you ever got there if you really wanted to do that. Once you've got a decent handle on a lot of changes, like some foundational ones like we've talked about, and then some more interesting ones, you start to build a portfolio of change in your spirit dance. You then start looking to what happens to these things in different contexts when they're working together in different combinations. And that's what the animal spirits are about. It's about the commonly recurring energy patterns within complex animals. And the animals that shamans have picked out aren't a million miles away from us in general. Mm. They tend to be close to us. They tend to be our cousins. You could have a shaman who specialized in something like, praying mantis or ant spirit dance or something, but it's very, very unusual to find that. And it's not that it wouldn't be interesting or informative or anything like that, but in a certain way, we're trying to learn about ourselves through this shamanism thing, this shamanism activity. And therefore, what's a good way to find out about yourself is to start understanding your cousins, the people who have helped to get you here, the people who have brought us into, when I say people, you know what I mean by people, because, wolves are people and orangutans are people, chimpanzees are people. The people who have brought us into this place where we are, these kind of strange, very strange animals that we've become. And there are animals that are closely related to us that are not quite as strange as we are in terms of they have less miasma than we do, wild animals. And the kind of animals that they are, I think it's worth reviewing but my point is there's no accident that shamans tend to, choose things like bears and tigers and eagles and stuff for their spirit dance. These are all animals that are fairly closely related to us. That, take bears and eagles, you take a common selection, wolves, and admittedly you get a lot of snake and that type of stuff, but swallows, these sort of things, dogs, these type of animals. So in Mongol, there would be Nokhoi, Bar, Chono, we got Nokhoi, not to be confused with Mokhoi, Mur, Barkai, Bured, Hratze, Zotodz, Techa, and others like that. These are all the typical kind of animals that shamans have picked in that area of the world, the Siberia-related area of the world, Altai Mountains, Mongolia, China.
Do shamans sometimes pick other primates then? I can't really think.
For sure. But you got to remember that if we're talking about that area of the world, there are no primates to speak of. Once you're getting down into China and places there are. But they do. I mean, monkey is a big one, isn't it? Certainly in China, I guess it's no secret that myself and Joe practice a particular very shamanistic martial art called Xingyi, and it has 12, in inverted commas, animals. We've got more than 12 because I've studied multiple lines of it, and Joe has by proxy multiple lines of Xingyi, and each one of those lines has 12, but actually they don't all agree exactly on what the 12 are. They're mostly the same, but there's some variation. So we actually end up with more than 12. So those sort of animals, I mean, if we just take the Xingyi animals, we can run through them. A lot of these you'll find are also spirit animals that Mongolian shamans will also practice. They're not a different set of animals. There's a great commonality there. So sure, for instance, is snake, and so that would be Mokhoi in Mongol. Chinese shamans, shamanistic martial artists of the past, picking the same kind of animal as Mongolian shamans would do. The tiger's another one. The Bar in Mongolian, again, another animal in both. We've got Ji, which is like the chicken, again. Zotodz Tacher. And we've got the horse, Ma, which is Mur in Mongol. So what you can see as we go through them, sooner or later I'm going to come to one that Mongolian shamans probably don't practice that much. We've got Yan, which is swallow, which is Hratze in Mongol. And now I'm up to one, the crocodile, the Tuo, is one that there is a Mongol word for it, but you probably won't find many Mongol shamans practicing it. And that's just because of lack of familiarity. In China, they've got the crocodiles down near Anhui, the Tuo down near Anhui, so they're familiar with those animals. They've studied those animals, and of course, not a lot of crocodiles in Mongolia. And so we have the goshawk, Yaoxing in Xingyi, which is also in Mongolia. It's Oleg Hartsag in Mongolian, and then monkey, right? Hao in Chinese, monkey, because there's lots of monkeys in China. And so basically the idea of, and in Africa...
Have you purposefully missed bear and eagle?
It's not purposeful, mate, but we can have a conversation
I was going to ask you, because there's some debate about whether the bear eagle is two separate animals or whether it's one.
Yeah, but that's not in shamanism, mate. That's just in Xingyi. Yeah, but
okay.
Yeah. So obviously a bear and an eagle are two separate animals, and you get both in so Barkai is bear in, and we all know that as Bured is eagle, because we've used that term Burek Shika Tarate so many times on this podcast. So a bear and an eagle are separate animals, and they'll be very, very commonly chosen animals by shamans the world over, frankly. And for good reason. Bears have a very exploratory, inquisitive character, and so do human beings. So it's really good to look at an animal that's so similar to us in many ways, but somehow different as well, when we're trying to understand the patterns, the energy patterns that it uses in its life, that as it fills its niche, as you said, as it fills its niche within nature. And this is where this idea from shape comes from. Now, there is an eagle in China called the bear eagle. This is also a fact. It's not just in China, it's in Japan as well, where it's called the kumataka, the bear hawk. So they call it a bear eagle in China. They call it a bear hawk. And what it is, this particular eagle, it hunts a lot like other eagles, but it does tend to take its prey on the ground. And for this reason, it exhibits, it's quite stocky, and it exhibits a lot of bear-like movements when it's killing on the ground. It's maneuvering, and it also takes prey, famously, it takes prey that are a lot bigger than it is. So it needs that kind of softness and inquisitiveness you get in the bear, in bear character. And so it's an eagle that behaves a bit like a bear sometimes. So from a shamanistic point of view, there's no problem with this. There are bears, there are eagles, and there are bear eagles. There's no problem. But you know what the martial arts are like, don't you? You know what the martial arts are like. And its Latin name of the bear eagle is Bisaetus nipalensis, and its Western name is the mountain hawk eagle. In China, it's Xiongyin, the bear eagle. And in Japan, it's kumataka, as I said, the bear hawk. So both Chinese and Japanese have picked up on this bear-like character in their naming of that eagle, stroke hawk. And it is a very interesting one. It's a one that obviously as Xingyi practitioners, we know quite a bit about. And it's also one that I've spent quite a bit of time independently of the stuff that I've learned from the Xingyi tradition, studying, obviously, because it's very foundational in Xingyi. We should mention this. Bear and eagle in Xingyi are considered like the most foundational animals, because within the 12 that Xingyi schools pick, eagle tends to be the most yang animal and bear tends to be the most yin animal out of the portfolio of animals that Xingyi's picked out. But the point I was really trying to make was that the kind of animals that you find in a lot of martial arts that have a shamanistic sort of background, like Xingyi, that come from folk religion, they tend to pick the self-same animals that, in general, there are a few exceptions, right? Crocodile and stuff like that, and turtle and this sort of thing. But generally, with a few exceptions, they're picking the self-same kind of animals that, Mongolian Siberian shamans are picking out for their practice. And the reason is they come down on the same kind of ones is, A, they want to study a lot. They don't just want to study one. That's no fun. They want to study a whole bunch of different animals. And B, they're all really closely related to us, genetically speaking, compared to like amoebas or, I don't know what else you would say, protozoans and that type of thing, or even like, so octopi would be interesting. What are octopuses? They'd be very interesting. They're complex animals. They use very rich things. I've seen them doing their stuff, and they use all kind of weird and wonderful energy patterns, and they're very sophisticated in their use of that. But they're not really close to us, like most of the animals that shamans tend to pick out. That's the point. But obviously, there's necessity. You can't, if you don't pick real animals and go and look at real animals, studying them the traditional ways in a state of Chilisti. This is one of the reasons why we pick up this ability to practice Chilisti and Amskar. That lightweight observation of self can be projected onto other creatures, like bears, for instance. And that lightweight observation of self ability is really important, because what happens otherwise is what's happened in some martial arts. For instance, is that we project our human idea of what, for instance, a tiger is like. And then we end up standing in a really low horse stance with our hands in claws going grrr, or something like growling, That's because that's what we as humans think tigers are like. But as you know from Xingyi practice, in some martial arts, they've actually gone and looked at actual tigers and seen what they actually do. And then, then you have a reference point that's outside of human beings. And the great thing I always liked about Xingyi is as a martial art, there's always a reference point outside of what people say, because, all martial arts, they're always arguing with each other. But there is a reference point, which is the real animals. They're all still with us. Every single one of the Xingyi animals, or some of them are heavily endangered, is still with us, with the possible exception of the Chinese tiger, which may or may not exist in the world. But other tigers do. Yeah. I mean, for instance, Siberian tiger.
Maybe because it's Xingyi, I don't know. But a lot of these animals that we're discussing are predatory. Is that a character trait that would make it more akin to the human being?
Sure.
Sort of, that would make it more interesting.
And gatherers. They're hunter-gatherers, right? A lot of them. I mean, some of them are pure predators like the tiger, but also monkeys and bears, they're hunter-gatherers just like we are. We are in a natural state. Again, there's no coincidence in the fact that these animals being picked out. I mean, if you want to think the world over, what are every country you go to, what are the most commonly seen animals as spirit animals that are used in animal spirit dance and other spirit animal related techniques in shamanism? What are they? Well, very, very, if you were to take all the shamanistic peoples, North, South America, all over the world, Siberia, Africa, all this kind of stuff, you're going to find some kind of bird of prey in there, and you're probably going to find bears rank very well in there as well. Obviously, in Africa, you're going to get a lot more sort of monkeys, and you're going to get things like the famous camel dance and this sort of stuff, other animals that are native to Africa. But you're going to get big cats, and you're going to get birds of prey. But you're also going to get what biologists tend to describe as omnivores, because that's effectively we have to call them omnivores when they're animals, but when they're human beings, we call them hunter-gatherers. No, that's an omnivore. That's what it is, We eat whatever's going. And again, bears are a great example of that. Monkeys can be a great example of that as well, in various different ways, depending on which monkeys. I'm using the term monkey in a broad sense here. And this is another thing that you learn through studying this stuff. When you start off on it, I said, I want to learn the snake spirit dance. And especially with snake, it's like, well, which snake are we talking about? There are commonalities between different snakes in terms of how they live their lives, but there are also broad differences as well. Really, really unusual variations. And also eagles, for instance. Everybody thinks, what, the mighty eagle, the mighty golden eagle, we used to have up in Scotland. I used to go radio tracking these things, the mighty golden eagle, the biggest eagle in, for hundreds of miles around, the king of the skies, is people imagine it flying along looking for a goose or something, or what you might actually find it doing is sat at the edge of a pond trying to fish the frogs out with its claws, not actually doing any flying at all. Their behavior, their actual lives can be much more varied than human beings assume. And this is why chillicity is so important in this stuff. The great thing about being modern human beings is we have all these wonderful wildlife photographers who've been out with their video cameras and their cameras capturing all this stuff for us, and we're not having to risk life and limb like shamans of the past did studying tigers.
Some of the best stuff is the BBC David Attenborough stuff. Planet Earth and what was it, Dynasties? If you've seen Dynasties, it's just incredible.
We
and
talked
you get
a bit
so
about
close to them.
Yeah, we talked a bit about the BBC on Heretics, and we'll probably come back to them. I did work there at one point in time, and there's a argument that David Attenborough is used too much as a justification for the BBC. His stuff is truly great. If you haven't seen it, which you probably have, wherever you are, it's definitely worth looking up. But there's just loads of this stuff on YouTube and places like that now, just animals in action, animals doing stuff. I mean, obviously the focus tends to be on them hunting and what they can do. And what I think we'll do as time goes forwards, we'll do individual episodes on individual animals and just try and get a bit of an overview in this one. As we progress forwards, we'll talk about particular animals, what the characteristics. But where I was coming to was, if you take snakes in general, that there is even overarching categories of snakes that snakes can fall into, and they're very different from each other. And in Xingyi, they're referred to as the yin snake and the yang snake, but basically it's like kind of vipers and constrictors, isn't it? There's the snakes that are using their venom and their bite as just a form of defense, or to subdue prey that they're then going to subsequently consume. That's like the venom-based approach. And then there are the famous constrictors, the anacondas and stuff, where they get a hold and then they use clever positioning to effectively suffocate the prey that they're going to consume. Two both hunting strategies, but two quite different hunting strategies, and they're used in different combinations by different snakes. So again, when we go into we'll have a snake episode for sure, a snake episode or two. Very, very varied. And I think for that reason, and also because snakes are so widely incorporated in human mythology and human traditions, there are creatures that have been of great interest to human beings for a very long period of time, then that's why they're relatively distant from us in ancestry, but we still study them. Shamans really interested in snakes for whatever reason. We still study them. So,
given that we are animals ourselves as human beings, and some might say, in a certain context, very interesting animals, is there merit in studying ourselves through the lens of an animal spirit dance, or is it the case that all of our practice up to this point has been that, shedding the miasma and trying to understand who we are as animals, and it's the case that the animals are a way to view the world through multiple different lenses?
It's both.
So, yeah.
It's both. So first of all, they are aware, because if you try and come up with portfolios of technique, portfolios of changes within your spirit dance, it's hard work, especially rich and complex, because there's so much potential variety in there. Once you start really getting into level 4 changes, there's so much variety in there, it becomes overwhelming. You start to get swamped. So what shamans have done instead is they've looked to other animals. What kind of portfolio, what kind of bag of energy changes has this particular animal been using in this particular context? Let's have a go at that first. Let's put that into human terms in a spirit dance and try and be honest about it. And as long as you are honest about it, as long as you try and embody the energy changes, so we're not talking about copying the animal's movements so much as embodying the changes that the animal is incorporating in the way that it's incorporating them into its lifestyle. As long as you do that in an honest kind of way with Chalisti and Amska, employing those two techniques, you will come to the other approach to this, or the other idea behind this, which is through understanding our cousins, we come to understand ourselves. And this is the idea of the dragon in the Xingyi tradition. The dragon was the symbol of the purported founder of Xingyi. If you want to learn about that stuff, we have an ongoing series that's already very, very long on Xingyi.
About 24 episodes on that.
It's long anyway. I don't know how many episodes. On the Heretics podcast, so head over and listen to that. But Yufei is an important figure in the development of Xingyi. And the dragon in many ways symbolizes the best aspects of human character. Not all aspects of human character. And this is true in Chinese mythology as well. The best and most noble aspects of the human character. And that's why, they pick the dragon as the symbol of the ruling, the emperor, effectively. And they give depending on your rank in society, your dragon would have a different number of claws. Obviously, the more claws, the higher ranking you are. So emperor would have a 5-clawed dragon. I guess the crown prince would have a 4-clawed dragon, or that type of thing. The association between dragons and human beings is long-standing, and obviously the Yellow River is often seen as a dragon, like it coils around like that, and it's just like a yellow dragon. And that's the birth of Chinese civilization. But the idea that it only represents the noble aspects of human beings, like Yufei was a very noble person if you read about his life or listen about his life on the Heretics podcast. And so it really represents, in that tradition, I think, from a shamanistic point of view, it represents the natural component of human beings, that what we are as collaborative, creative, nurturing creatures, the type of creatures that we are, it represents just those aspects. And in a way, you can think of the other animals, coming to an understanding of the other animals through, for instance, animal spirit dance. There are other animal spirit techniques in shamanism. It helps us to see ourselves from the outside in, from looking at how would, for instance, how does a tiger see us? How does a snake see us? And how can we look at ourselves in that kind of a way? Certainly, the kind of miasmatic stuff that we all deal with on a day-to-day basis, a lot of us, certainly myself included, that kind of stuff is of no concern whatsoever to those creatures. I have no interest in many of the kind of meetings that I attend in my day-to-day business, for instance. I have no interest whatsoever in what's going on in those meetings. And,
I've just got this image of like, you go to YouTube and you type animal spirits and you want to see the human, it'll just be sat in the office.
But what are they interested in? And I don't mean interested just in their mind. I mean, what are they interested in their mind, spirit, and body, all unified as one? What are they interested in? And if we can take an interest in what they're interested in rather than what we're interested in, now there is a deep, deep and really powerful learning tool. And as I've said so many times, being a shaman is about putting yourself in a place where nature can teach you. Well, this is nature teaching you on steroids, if you like. This is nature teaching you with a massive amplifier. Not in the simplistic ways that we've dealt with on the podcast to date, find all the ways to cross the stream and all that kind of stuff. But here's what nature can do when it really wants to. We're talking about the pinnacle of the tree here, the tree of nature that proceeds from sort of simple origins into complex, ever more bewilderingly complex patterns of energy change. Here's the pinnacle of the tree. These are the top things that on this planet, on this earth, have gone up there. I mean, some of them have gone beyond humans. Buraj Shikartarate, the reason why we're so interested in eagles, one of the reasons why is they can do things that we can't. I mean, sure, they can fly, right? But what about their perceptive ability, their ability to grip that tapestry, that weave of nature, and to spot things that never in a million years would we spot if we were at that altitude in a plane. They fly high, these things that they've seen. I mean, for instance, the bear eagle, they've seen them flying at more than 10,000 feet, which is pretty high. If we're in a plane flying at that height, we ain't spotting a marmot on the ground, It's not happening. It's just not happening for 10,000 feet, It's just not happening. And there's two reasons why it's not happening. Their eyes are a bit better than ours, fair enough. But also their ability to grip nature, their ability to hang in and participate within the weave of nature is also far beyond ours, even further beyond ours than their eyes are beyond ours. Actually, in purely zoological terms or physiological terms, our eyes are actually pretty good compared to a lot of animals, but we're certainly not the best. But eagles have a chance of claiming that title. So that perceptive ability, that Buraj Shikartarate that we learn from eagles and others, other animals, is a great example of why we need to study eagles as human beings. Because if not, we end up standing in a horse stance, making clawed hands and growling, and thinking that's nature. And also, if you want to know about all this stuff, how much human beings in our miasma have kicked back against nature over the millennia, then again, Heretics Podcast is a great way to find out about all the weird and wonderful things in which that happened in Christianity and Confucianism and all these kind of places. That's what that podcast is all
also,
about.
if you want a lead into that, we did do 3 episodes as a series here on this podcast, which is a great introduction to it.
Absolutely.
Interesting, and then you can head over to Heretics after that, or just head over to Heretics anyway. But anyway, we've got 3 episodes. I think it's 15, 16, and 17, or around that area. So if you go back through our episodes, you'll find them. Damon, do you think that it would be wise to give one quote unquote simple example of a change that you're talking about in the context of an animal? My thinking here is to give our listeners a clue as to what that truly means, or what that means in the context of the stage 4 that we've been looking at, or anything to further the kind of understanding of what we're talking about here.
Sure. So let's take a very simple change. So let's take a squall and guy, for instance, since we've mentioned them already. The squall is about energy compressing and expanding, going away and coming back again. It's just like the waves on the shore, right? They roll back down the beach and then they crash up on the shore, yeah? And Gaia is like the planets going around the sun. It's like the sun going around the Milky Way, energy cycling around. Now, bears, when they are hunter-gathering, rather than foraging, let's call it hunter-gathering, because that's what they're doing. They're out. Look, they're in this kind of a mode. They are doing a kind of spirit dance. And I think a lot of people get caught out by bears because they make the mistake of thinking, how do bears behave? How do I keep myself safe around bears? If bears do this, then I should do that and all that kind of stuff. But that's not how bears behave. Bears are like we used to be. They are very inquisitive animals. But they're inquisitive as part of their lifestyle. They are searching and exploring. So, for instance, they will use circumvention they will take energy around things. I mean, for instance, in terms of getting behind the bark of a tree, they've got these claws, they can slide them in. They want to get behind the bark because they're exploring what's in there. Maybe there's some yummy ants for them to eat. Yeah. But they'll also use compression and expansion. They'll use a fair old amount of power when they're hunting. If they're taking down an elk, for instance, they're using an awful lot of power in that, but also they're using torrent. They won't just like grab onto an elk and hang on for grim death. They will literally knock the thing over because they'll have a much better control of it on the ground. So they're using the torrent change there in order to do that. And they are also, whenever you're using torrent, there's always a certain amount of kindle going on there. As the animal resists, they will be following its energy in order to avoid damage. And this is why bears are such a useful animal in the martial arts. Its ability to avoid damage when a lot of force is involved is at a very, very high level. And if you watch their interplay when they're either facing off with each other or they're taking down a big animal when they're hunting, they're exceptionally good at that. And that ability to use the kindle to introduce energy just judiciously where it's needed in conjunction with the torrent and the circumvention. So, for instance, when something with a lot of power kicks back at them, think of a water buffalo or a tiger, A water buffalo is infinitely more powerful than a tiger. The tiger is able to circumvent that, to move its energy around, either through compression and expansion, through swallowing Gaia, in interplay, in order to preserve itself. And that's why tigers can actually, believe it or not, take down full-grown water buffaloes. They probably don't choose that as their first choice on their menu because it's the danger level involved, but they are able to do it, which is just spectacular. So there's 4 changes that a couple of animals are using. But whenever I say these things, it's an overly simplistic explanation of what's going on. And this is why I think we need to do at least one whole episode on any individual animal, because there is actually so much stuff to say. I mean, for instance, tigers don't do that all the time. One of the things that that's really important about tigers is they use shard a lot. In terms of the sense, they take action that cuts off their energy patterns from the surrounding environment. They are ambush predators. They're taking a whole range of different actions, many of them subtle. For instance, have you ever heard a tiger walking through a forest? It's so silent. And the way that its feet are going down onto the ground is very special. And it's actually very complex. And there's a whole host of different stuff, including Squall Gaia and Meld and Jag going on in that area. Sorry, I'm just using these things for brevity, or we'll be here all week. But you need to look up elsewhere on the podcast go back to the Amabella episodes or somewhere else if you want to know what these terms mean. But all of those things are being used in combination. So this is what I mean by the richness of it. Just studying how a tiger moves through the forest in a silent way, that's a lifetime of study if you really were interested in that. And then can you take that into your spirit dance? Can you step in the same way that the tiger is? Can your foot fall on the ground of your grove in the same way, using the same energy patterns that the foot of a tiger touches down in the forest floor when it's hunting? And I mean when it's hunting. Yeah. And it's very, very special and very, very complex, but very, very effective. And that's because ambush predator. Now, this is what I mean by you can't just say, big cats, right? No way a cheetah behaves like that. Not in a million years, right? It just doesn't. So it does in a certain sense before it starts its run. And you could say that a tiger also starts its run in a certain way, but generally when tigers attack, they are virtually on top of the prey. They have used that ability to get right on top of it. Well, obviously a cheetah doesn't need that given how fast it can run, but they will want to get close, and then will be applying similar kind of energy patterns in their hunting. It's not all about growling and having claws. This is my point, and this is why when we get into Animal Spirit Dance, I want to do the animals justice. Have at least a whole episode per animal. Probably, for something like the bear or the eagle, we probably have 3 episodes each or something like that. I want to do them justice. But that's an example of energy pattern changes. The meld is very, very important in that silent walking that the tigers do. But also, you've got the whole thing they know, intuitively, in a state of chillicity, they know when to move and when not to move, all this kind of stuff. And because their prey animals are really good at avoiding them, really, really good. And they're on a hair trigger, those things, deer and stuff like that. In the forest where tigers live, they're on a hair trigger all the time, and their reactions are phenomenal. Same with, crocodiles coming down. When the animals come down to the edge of the water to feed and the crocodiles go for them, whole episode on crocodiles we can do. They're on a hair trigger. They're really, really good. And this is how evolution works. But it's what energy patterns are they applying in all of those things? And you find they're complex and many and varied. And just you could spend your whole life as a shaman picking one animal and going deep, deep, deep into spirit dance, for instance, with just that animal. And you would never run out of new things to try, and you would never run out of richness and variety. But obviously, it's very interesting to study more than one. And I'm not saying you have to go to the crazy extent of Xingyi's 12, but it is a really, really interesting thing. And then taking on that animal spirit on yourself and ultimately seeing the world in a state of chillicity through the eyes of that animal is in itself a kind of level 6 technique. If you can get to that place where you're no longer a human being and you are that animal in that place. And I don't mean imagining it. I mean literally seeing the world in the same way that animal sees the world. Then you can call that a spirit journey. You can call that level 6 technique, the Ayla. That is what that is. If you're doing it in a genuine way, in an honest way, without any imagination being involved, you have achieved a spirit journey of a sort. You've journeyed out of a human being and into a different creature. That's what you've actually achieved there, the spirit journey. It's not the famous kind of spirit journey, but I count that kind of technique at an equivalent level 6 level as the more famous kind of spirit dance, if you like. Out of spirit dance, coming into the Ayla, the spirit journey. Yeah.
Well, that was actually going to be my last question of the day. Maybe a Joseph question, but what's the ultimate purpose here? Why are we wanting to explore the animals in the first place? Why do we want to give ourselves these extra lenses to view the world through?
It's a good question. I think there's two different answers to that. I mean, one is one of the things we find out about our nature, the dragon, if you like. One of the things we find out about our nature as we go on in life as shamans, progressive shamans, is that's part of our nature. Human beings are naturally quite inquisitive, like bears, inquisitive creatures. And we're the kind of creatures that are interested in doing stuff like that. At least some of us are. But also, we're also very adaptive. And we are able to apply these kind of things into our everyday lives. I mean, for instance, just Burachika, that has been invaluable, given that I've done such a huge amount of driving in my life, just colossal amount, certainly over 1 million miles anyway. Given that I've done that amount of driving in my life, the thing that's probably kept me safe, not saying that it's infallible, that Burachika that has come to me from an eagle, ultimately, has stood me in very, very good stead in the very odd human realm of driving, for instance. That's one example. And, there's a reason why all these martial arts masters of the past wanted to study these animals. There's a reason why. And it's a no-brainer if you think about it in simplistic terms. Who's better at fighting, me or a tiger? It's like, well, I don't really fancy doing the experiment to find out, but I'm pretty confident that my assumed outcome would be the actual outcome. They are just better at us, at other things than us. Eagles are better at that whole perception thing. Tigers are better at basically taking out large animals like us. They're very, very good at that. And, we have this in our nature. So that's one answer to why you might want to study. It makes life interesting. But another reason why you might want to study it is if you're a specialist in spirit dance technique like me, but I guess it's also true of drum technique and other, Homeluk and other types of shamanic technique, is variety is the key to understanding the universe. And that's what shamans want to do. We want to understand the universe in an energetic sense. Shamans are energy specialists. We want to understand energy changes ultimately. And there's only so far we can go under our own power. We need nature's help for this. But otherwise, we're just too prone to imagination, which is part of that other thing that I was talking about. That we're too prone to imagination, so we need nature's help. And if we really want to take this far, nature has handed this deep, deep understanding of complexity, how complex nature can get. Handed it to us on a plate in terms of our cousins, the eagles, the tigers, the bears, the hawks, the swallows, the fighting cocks, the crocodiles, whatever you want to call it, the camels, handed it to us on a plate. And we'd be really stupid, really, really stupid not to take advantage of that. And as long as we can maintain the whole Chalicity thing, the Amskar thing, and be honest about it, and are we really embodying things that have come from eagles and bears and hawks and tigers and that kind of stuff? Are we really doing it? We're not just imagining it. We're not, and part of the problem is our whole culture, isn't it? We read about how dangerous wolves are, Little Red Riding Hood, right? So if you've read Little Red Riding Hood or stories of that ilk, Peter and the Wolf and all these kind of traditional tales, you're probably, because of that, when you were a child, you're probably in a much worse place to study wolves in a shamanistic sense than somebody who hasn't read those things and hasn't been conditioned as a child, a much, much worse place. This is the point that I wanted to make really on this episode, is that if you're approaching animal spirit dance or approaching spirit animals in shamanism, the need for Chalicity and Amskar is through the roof in this subject area because of all that mythology that our religions have built into. It wasn't Adam and Eve who caused the trouble in the garden, was it? In our religions, in our miasma, it was the poor snake, right? All that stuff, and the reason snakes haven't got any legs is because they were cursed by God, to not have any legs, not that it's for what they do, they're much better adapted to what they do. You try crushing a capybara with your body, see how well you get on. It's just, that whole miasma thing is just nonsensical in this area, but it is problematic because at a more subtle level, I've given some silly, simplistic examples there, but at a more subtle level, it influences us constantly. And as shamans, we have to be on the guard against that imagination thing all the time, especially if we're going to take advantage of animal spirits. So what I think we should do going forwards on this podcast is we've got to get back to some more level 4 changes. That's what we're going to do. We will do lots more, but every now and again, I suggest we do an episode on an animal spirit or two, just interspersed in among them. I don't know what you think.
100%. Yeah.
That'll
be fascinating.
And at least try to
and it's also worth pointing out that we've talked about it from a martial art point of view in Xingyi, but it's in no way a martial art thing. This is it. It is, but it isn't.
So it's an everything thing. I mean, one of the ways to think about it, very shamanistic martial arts like Xingyi, for instance, that are that way inclined to begin with, at least were at one point in the past. I mean, there's a whole thing. Just listen to Heretics podcast. Basically, there's a whole thing with dumbing down of these things through time, and various political movements have seen that as advantageous, like the Kuomintang and the CCP and various other people. But I'm talking about as they were originally. There's no way a martial art that has a major focus on 12 animals. The people who created that martial art had no interest in animals. It's just that, like, that just can't be true, And also, when you look into how the animals are done in the old school Xingyi, I mean, for instance, the way that the bear, the tiger pounce is done, although they've dumbed down that to a two-handed push of some strange variety, but anyway, in modern times, but the way that they're done. And then you look at animal videos, you can see a lot of commonality. These people really looked at real animals in a shamanistic way. And obviously, real shamans are out there in nature anyway all the time. For instance, the guys in Mongolia, the guys in Siberia, the events that we've talked about, these guys, and also shamans in the shamanistic traditions in Japan, Miki's tradition, for instance, which has, interestingly, she had a lot of sea creatures in her tradition that were spirit animals, which we'll talk about as well. Turtles and this sort of stuff. So those people really looked at real animals and really took the essence of real animals and incorporated it into their shamanism. And it just so happens that this particular martial art has a bunch of animals. Other martial arts do as well. And I feel that a lot of martial arts started off in a very shamanistic place, and then gradually, the whole 20th century did them an awful lot of damage in that sense. But the essence is still there. And Tai Chi is no different. The crane and the snake thing in Tai Chi. Mantis Kung Fu is an example of people who went off and studied a very, very different relative, in terms of insect kingdom there you're talking about. But I feel all these things started off in a very shamanistic place. And Muay Thai, of course, in Thai boxing, with its whole thing around the whole cockfighting and all that kind of stuff in Thailand. One of the most shamanistic martial arts on the planet. So yeah, I think a lot of martial arts start off in that place, but then politics and history and modernization and sports and all kinds of things tend to dumb them down over time. It's inevitable as sort of other miasmatic influences and other non-miasmatic influences come to play on them. And I think, that's happened to Xingyi and various others. So yeah, and also monkey. You mentioned monkey there. Primates, goodness me, how many episodes will we have to do on those guys? Those are our closest relatives, right? This is a point to be made, and the monkey is incredibly rich. I spent a lot of time on primates, monkeys in general, both in a Xingyi context and in a shamanism context. There is a lot there. There is multiple lifetimes of study as a shaman just in that place without going to any other animal. So yeah, and this is what's wonderful about all this stuff. Shamanism balloons as you go further with it. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And you realize it's the biggest subject there is. And one of the things that really opened my eyes to that, going, years ago, back to the 1980s, one of the things that really opened my eyes to that was the animals. That was just, I realized that, not fully realized, but realized the magnitude of this thing that I was trying to break into. You could be off-put by that, but you can see it in two ways, can't you? You can see it as it's very, very difficult in the context that we all live in today, this sort of civilized context to break into that kind of thing. But on the other hand, isn't it a wonderful challenge? Wonderful. None of those other animals, you don't get tigers going out and studying bears, it just doesn't happen, right? But this is our weirdness as a species. This is what we're like. And in a way, by doing this, we're also embodying the nature. We're bringing to light our true nature as human animals, That's what's wonderful about it.
Yeah, our inquisitive nature.
Yep.
Beautiful.
Shall we call it a day there, then, mate?
Yeah, let's call it a day there. That's been fantastic. I learnt loads on that one. So thanks, Damon. And if you want to support us over on Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/wovenenergy. Get lots of goodies over there. Thanks for listening. And, as always, you can check out the previous episodes, and we'll see you in the next one.
That's great. Thanks a lot, guys.